All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to talk about React router hooks. Now, we already talked about some React hooks, such as useState and useEffect, and those are going to be the main hooks that we'll be utilizing. There is hundreds of hooks inside of React. I think in the newest version, a couple of them became kind of obsolete, but useState and useEffect are still sticking around as far as how the virtual DOM is being manipulated, and it's likely going to stick around for a very, very long time. Now, with that said, what about React Router DOM? Well, React Router DOM has its own hooks and its own capabilities and limitations that it's giving us to be able to work within projects. We talked about what is the use of it, because I could have just written in JavaScript code a ternary statement, something that interacts with the URL and checks the actual URL that's being rendered on the site currently, and then from there, render a component. Could have done that all myself through actually typing it out. Oh, excuse me, through actually writing it out in code in JavaScript. But we decided to use React Router DOM because it gives us some capabilities. Well, what are those capabilities? Let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'm going to go into main.jsx and remove the strict mode here. All right, the strict mode has been removed. I already have in my dependencies. Well, actually, where could I check my dependencies to see what is already installed into this application?
Package.json.
Perfect. So I come over to my package.json in my project. And in my package.json, if I come down to dependencies, I see that I have Axios installed, so I can make API calls. I see that I have Bootstrap already installed. And I also see that I have React Router DOM. So those three dependencies are already within my project. I wonder if I have a test suite. I don't have a test suite, and that's okay for now. Maybe we could add a test suite tomorrow to this project. All right. So there you go. I have my dependencies installed. One of them is React Bootstrap. What else do I need to ensure is on my project in order for React Bootstrap to work properly?
You need
Tailwind.
this. You need the CSS call
Nice.
to import the CSS for Bootstrap.
Yeah, I need to make sure that there's an import statement in main.jsx for Bootstrap and their main CSS file. All right. Awesome. So I have that there in line 5. That's why my project looks a little weird. Okay. So now I know that all of my project is built correctly, that all my dependencies are installed, and that React Bootstrap is working correctly. I'm going to go ahead and remove all the CSS here, just so that it's not getting in the way of what we'll be interacting with today. And now I want to create a project that's going to have a couple of different characters. So let me explain the goal of today, of the project that we'll be building today. Today we're going to be interacting with this Game of Thrones API. And inside of this Game of Thrones API, I want to create it so that a user can view a character or maybe multiple characters as they're interacting with my API. So with that said, I'm going to have a home page, an about page, and instead of a contact page, I want to make this a characters page. Something similar to what we've seen with the Rick and Morty API. All right. So first I want to create this after. Oh, totally forgot to switch that there. This after React Router DOM portion so that it's actually being rendered on the screen appropriately through a router. And I want to make sure that my application is able to speak with its children or the pages within my app. So as a class, how would I go about doing that?
Well, you need the correct imports.
I need the correct imports. What am I?
Oh, I
What
guess
am
well, you already have it installed, I guess. So
Are we
yeah,
speaking about React? Yes. So I already have React Router DOM installed. So what would be the next part?
um, I mean, I don't see everything on your screen, but I mean, you need like import router provider and from router.dom, those kinds of. I just don't remember all the exact imports.
Yeah. So I'm gonna grab router provider from React Router DOM. Awesome. And instead of the application to being rendered, I want to render the router provider. Now the router provider takes in one parameter here, or one prop, and that's going to be the router. Well, currently I don't have one. So what would be next?
Create like a router page or something.
So you're saying create some pages?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we don't have the router
You don't have the
.jsx file.
router.jsx.
All right. Let me go ahead and create some pages first here, and then we'll go ahead and create our router. So here inside of pages, I'm going to create my home page. My about page. And my characters page. All right. Let me go ahead and write this out here. All right, so there's our about page has been created. Let me go ahead and open up my characters page. And in here, all I'm going to do is change about to characters. Now I'm going to open up my home page. And same thing, I want to change that about to home. All right, so now I've created my pages, just like Morty said. And I believe the next step that we mentioned was creating a router. So I'm going to go ahead and change directory 1 back to my source directory and create a router.jsx. Now for the import, I'll go ahead and take over that. What we want is we want to import create browser router from React Router DOM. We want to ensure we import the application itself and then import all of our pages. Perfect. So now we have all of our pages imported. How do I create a router?
Create browser router.
All right, so I'm going to make let me export default const. Do it that way.
We need like a path.
Okay, awesome. So we'll go with path.
Which is a slash, like for home page.
Where's my syntax error here?
Uh,
Do you need like a comma after path, and then you have to put the element for app?
I do, yes, but I have a syntax error and I'm not sure where it's coming from here. But we shall figure that out later on. All right, so we have our path. In this case, we mentioned slash because this is going to be our home. And then we just said, hey, we also want an element component. And this element component will be of app.
I think it's the get rid of those curly braces, and it needs to be a list you pass in to create browser router instead.
Ah, there it is. It's a parental list. That's what did it. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, so there we pass in the app. What else do we want there to be?
We need children.
Awesome. These are going to be the children of the application.
Index true.
Okay, this is going to be indexed true because this is what we want to show at the same time that the application renders. What element will that be?
For the
Um,
home page.
this might be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are those key reserved keywords, the path element children at all?
They're reserved keywords for the actual create browser router function. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't completely sure. Okay.
All right, Morty, thank you so much for guiding me up to this point, but I don't want you to steal everyone's thunder, so let's go ahead and pass it off to someone else that hasn't participated yet. What would be the next page?
Your about page.
Awesome. So how do I go about adding this about page?
Set your path to about
All
and
right.
make the element about page.
Awesome. So there's my about page. And then finally, one more page here, which is going to be our characters page. Now we could do the 404. So let's go ahead and leave a comment here saying 404 not found page missing, still needs to be added. And then an error element also missing. We'll leave those commented out for now, just so we could concentrate on building this router first. So let's go ahead and export default this router. The router is now being exported. So now we have our pages, we have the application. What's next?
Do you want to set like the the links or create like a nav bar, or is that like something you want to do? Because you can just type in the URL now.
Yeah, let me go ahead and create a nav bar real quick. I'm gonna make directory of components, change directory into components, and in there I'm gonna create a navbar.jsx. Here I'll go ahead and import link from React Router DOM. I'm gonna go ahead and create this navbar. Peace. All right, now this navbar is going to go ahead and have a link. Which is going to have a to attribute. This one will go to home. Here we'll go ahead and go to about. And then finally, we'll go to characters. I'll go ahead and add a little bit of styling here, just for simplicity's sake. Should do the trick. And then I'll go ahead and return, or excuse me, export default, the navbar. So now that I've created this navbar, where do we want this navbar to live, Chase?
You're gonna put it in the app.jsx page.
All right, so in app.jsx, I'm just going to go ahead and clear everything out here. And add my nav bar.
Then below the nav bar, what you also want to do outlet for like the current page that we're on.
Perfect. So outlet is what will connect my pages together from React Router DOM. All right. So currently everything seems fine. I'm getting a syntax error from main.jsx. What's going on in here?
You need to import the router.
Nice. Well, the router that we created, we need to finish connecting it by importing router. From router.jsx. Great. We just made quite a bit of changes. Let's go ahead and scroll all the way down to the bottom of our server here. It seems like everything is rendering. Let's check the application. We see that we have homepage, about page, and characters page with the appropriate URL changing for each one of them. Awesome. So that's a quick review over what we did yesterday. We now have all of our pages available to us. Now we can go ahead and start working on some code about our characters. Now, what we're going to talk about first is going to be passing in parameters. And I'm going to do that by just building an API call that will grab all of my characters first. And then from there, I'll create an A character page where we'll display all the details of one specific character. So now I'm going to go to the Game of Throws API, take a look at their documentation, and I see that they have a get all characters. I want to take a look at this. So it tells me there's no parameters that need to be done. And this is what would come back. An array of objects. If I click on try it out and execute, it gives me an example utilizing curl. And it gives me the API endpoint there. So here's my API endpoint. And then it shows me an example of the response. Awesome. So now that I have that, inside of my characters page, I'm going to want to create a function that will request data from the Game of Thrones API. Just going to go ahead and drop the link there. And then we'll iterate through the array of objects and create a list item for each character. How would I go about doing this?
Uh, I'm guessing axials.
Okay.
We need like an async function.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and create that. We're going to call this get characters.
Get
We
characters.
said we want to utilize an asynchronous function, which works. And then you mentioned Axios. So I'm just going to go ahead and assume that we want to create a try and catch block here. And then for a try, we probably want to actually grab the data, right? So we want to say let. We know we're going to want the data from the response. And you're saying we want to make an Axios request to the Game of Thrones API for characters. All right. So that gives me back my data. What do I do with that data attribute?
We need a function to store the data using like I think it's use state, right? Use state.
Got it. So we're going to need something to iterate through. So let's go ahead and do const all characters, set all characters. And we're going to make this equal to a use state of an empty array. All right. So now how do I utilize this function to actually change the value of this all characters?
So we set all characters to data.
All
So
right.
it's not stored in all characters. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. So now that we have this, we have the ability to grab all of our characters. We've created the function that will do this. How do I iterate through this array to create list items? Pass
I
it off
think
to
use
someone
the
else
map is
for
function.
this one, Morty. Yeah,
Oh,
you're
okay. Yeah.
right.
I'm
So
sorry.
let's pass
Yeah.
it off to someone else.
I'll mute real quick. I need to mute.
All right, let's hear it from somebody.
You can create a map function using the all characters.
Yeah, let's go ahead and create a list item or an unordered list there. And we want to map through all characters. Where for every character, we're going to go ahead and return an li item. Just for now, we'll keep it for an li and we'll switch it up later on. And this li item will just go ahead and render character dot first name. And I know this first name exists because I am making the relationship for every character will be one of these objects. So I know there's going to be a first name attribute that I can access inside of the character. And let's go ahead and add our character dot last name as well. All right. Now there's one piece that's missing, one puzzle piece that's missing here. Can anybody take a stab at what's the last portion for this character's page to work correctly?
Do you need to put them in some sort of like container or something?
Not necessarily, because we have the function. We're
If
able to iterate through characters.
you
Oh,
need
go
to
ahead.
wait till the data is actually captured, otherwise you're going to get an error. So do a ternary statement to say if the data is available, then render this, and if not, then render something like waiting.
In this case, we don't need to do that. If we're messing with something that was just a direct object, then we would set this to null to ensure that this is working properly. But because it's an array, when it maps through an empty array, it wouldn't do anything because there is no values inside of the array.
So that's only the case if you set the initial value to something like null or like a garbage array.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
We need like a use effect because to run the function.
Awesome. So we would want a use effect so that our function is executed upon the element mounting. And we don't need to set anything in the dependency array because this is in the entire purpose of this use effect is just to trigger this function. Well, let's see what we just created. There you go. I can go home, go to about, and when I go to characters page, that API request is sent. Once the information comes back, it gets rendered on the screen. And I have the ability to see all of the different characters inside of the Game of Thrones API. Does anyone have any questions over what we just did up to this point?
You go up to the characters page, like component again.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? All right, awesome. So now let's take a look at what happens because now I want to actually create a different page. And what this page is going to look like, it's going to ask for a specific character details. So instead of having a characters page, I am going to have one named a character, where I'm going to display all of the information of one specific character. Now, I could mess around with a bunch of use states to be able to do this information, but that's not the correct way of doing it. In this case, what I would like to do is look at the API and see if there's an API endpoint that would allow me to grab one specific character. So let me collapse this characters portion. Oh, excuse me. I still want this characters portion. Here I can see that I can post to create a character. And then there's this function down here where I can grab one specific character by ID. And it asks me to pass the ID parameter. Well, up above, I was able to get all of the IDs for all of them. Right? So for example, if I were to send the number 6 for that ID in this try it out playground, and send my request, I know that what I would expect to receive is the information regarding Ned Stark. So what would this page look like? Let's go ahead and create it here. I'm going to go ahead and make my a character page. I'm going to code it. This a character page is going to return one, an image with the source to the character. For now, I'm going to leave it as a broken image. So I'm going to say image. Oh, we'll leave that there. I also want to return an h2 tag that will have the character name. And then maybe all of the details, right? So let's go ahead and add a UL here with multiple LIs. It looks like we have one, two, three different things that can be said. So we can go ahead and do LI that will render the title. And then an LI that will render the family. And we see we have this full name, so we don't need to worry about this character name. Instead, we want to change that for full name. And there's the title and family. And everything else, as far as image and image URL, we don't necessarily need that information. All right. Now, in order for this character page to work, I need to make a request to the Game of Thrones API. And I can just grab this endpoint here. Now, once I have made this request, I need to display the character information. But more importantly, how do I get the IDs? Right? Because I want this to be flexible enough to render each ID for everything being selected. Well, this is where use parameters comes in. Yesterday, I went over to Crunchyroll, and I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. And if we come over to Crunchyroll and we click on a selected series, we can see that it's going to follow a URL pattern. It goes to series, and then it passes the ID for this one show. Well, we want to create that information. We want to be able to pass our ID as a parameter through our URL. So what we're looking at here is where it would say characters at 1, right? Or characters at 2, or 5, or 6, to be able to render the appropriate character on the screen. So let's create that in our router, because that's where that capability would exist. I'm going to come over to router.jsx. And in router.jsx, I want there to be an extra child that will follow the path of characters slash, and then say character ID with a closing slash. And what this will render will be the element of a character page. I'm glad I was able to export it because I totally forgot about that. So now a character page, oh, it's not being exported actually. Interesting. All right, so now I broke it, but I brought it back. So we have our path, passing in a character. But notice that these two are sharing the same URL pattern. The only difference is I am now placing a colon in front of the naming convention. Now that's what tells React Router DOM that this character ID is a parameter. We're going to go ahead and say parameter identified by a colon within the URL pattern. So let's see what happens once we actually send this request. When I sent this request to characters/6, we actually see a page here rendering, which is my a character page. I still have access to all of my characters, my home and about. But currently I don't have a way of reaching this a character page through this URL pattern. So let's connect the dots here. I have this list of characters that I want to be able to click on in order to render my one single character information. And that one single character information, I want to see it displaying on a character page. Well, first, let's see, how do we grab this parameter? Because we know we're going to need it for the function. We need the ID of the character to be displayed. Well, we know it's being identified as a parameter inside of our router because we specified it with a colon. So how do we grab it out of that parameter in our URL? We do that by utilizing something called useParams. So I'm just going to say const parameters or params be equal to use params from React Router DOM. So this is a hook from React Router DOM, use params, and I'm saving it to params. From there, I'm going to go ahead and console.log params, just so we could see what that data structure looks like. Let me go ahead and inspect and open up the console here. All right, I'm getting a warning for not assigning a unique key to each one of those allied elements. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and send 6. And here in my console, notice that we're getting an object. This object has the key of character ID and a value of string for the number 6. Where is this character ID key coming from?
Is it the
It's in
index?
your router page.
Yeah, if I take a look at my router page, that's what I named this parameter.
Hmm.
I said it was going to be named character ID. And where's this number 6 coming from?
Is
Is
it
it
going to come
the
in the JSON data? Sorry, Tim.
no worries? Is it the key, which is probably defaulting to the index of your map?
I was thinking you already entered 6, right? Up there, right?
That's close, but it actually has nothing to do with my code. The value of 6 is coming from my URL pattern up above.
Yeah, that's okay.
Right? So this key of character ID, that's coming from the parameter that I passed in or the name that I gave to that parameter. And the value of the parameter for 6 is coming from my URL pattern.
Just to be clear, you entered 6, right? Yourself up there?
I did, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right. Now I have that parameter being displayed. And I'm understanding that it's coming in. Well, I don't need the entire object. So I'm just going to change this to say character ID. And now we're just getting the number 6. So I am effectively grabbing the ID from the URL. So now let's make our site more dynamic here. And I'm actually just going to display it just so that we see it on screen and we don't have to worry about the console. Let's make our site dynamic so that I can select a character and it sends me to that A character page. Go over to characters page. And inside of this LI, I'm going to create a link. Now this link is going to aim to characters slash, and then what am I adding to this interpolated string here?
The character ID.
The character ID. Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and add the character dot ID. Let's make sure that's the actual attribute that's coming back. It is. All right. And let's finally close off our URL. Well, now let's take a look at what happens to our application. I click on the nearest. That's going to go ahead and show me the ID of 0. I click on Rob Stark. And it shows me the
king in the north.
All right. Awesome. So everything's working great. I'm now able to capture that character ID. And it's happening through use params. Now, before I continue in building this A character page, does anyone have any questions over what we just covered up to this point?
Could you go back to the characters page?
Absolutely.
And then down basically where we just did the link at. Okay, thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? All right. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So let's go ahead and pick up where we left off for this character. I know I'm going to want to capture the character that I'm going to be utilizing. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a use state for character and set character. And in this case, I'm going to make it equal to null. Now, this is where the ternary statement that you were talking about, Tim, would come in. Because I made it equal to null, I would say, hey, is there information for a character? If there isn't, I want you to render fetching data. And end my ternary statement. All right, I'll put it in a p tag. All right. So now when I come over to see Jon Snow, it's just going to say fetching data. And it's going to do that until there's an actual object being set for the character. So now I'm going to go ahead and create my function again of get character data. This is not going to be an asynchronous function, just so that we could see the syntax. I'm going to go ahead and say axios.get. I'm going to pass in the URL. And instead of passing in the number 6, I'm going to add my interpolated string here for character ID. That's going to send my request. From there, I'm going to grab the response and conduct the following. I'm going to grab the data from the response element, and I'm going to set it to the character. And if this doesn't work, I'm going to catch the error and alert the error element. All right, so there's my request in a non-synchronous function. I now create this within a use effect that would be triggered every time the page renders. All right. And let me actually go ahead and take a look at the value of this state. By adding it to my dependency array there. I'm going to inspect it, go over to the console. We can see I have an object. Here we have the House of Stark for Jon Snow. Go back to characters, go to Daenerys. There's my object for Daenerys. Go back to characters, go to Robert Baratheon. Renders null, and then it renders Robert Baratheon's information. All right, so I'm able to grab everything that I need for this API request. Now I can just change the information here. This will go to the character.image URL. And let me make sure that's correct. Oh, that did it. This will go to character.fullname. And these will go to character.title and family. So now there's Robert Baratheon. There's Daenerys. There's Brandon Stark. And Theon Greyjoy. does anyone have any questions about how to utilize use params to create this feature? The hook that we just learned is called use parameters. Again, we added it to our router by signifying it with a colon. This creates an object that we can call within the page with use params. And we're just destructuring that object to grab the character ID.
So in the router, you using it with a colon created the actual object and not the constant character ID.
In the router, me using it. Yes, so
Here.
this is what actually created the key for character ID. Correct.
All right.
I guess I need more of an explanation as far as like the fetch statement. So characters page, you used async to fetch all the characters.
Correct.
And then in a character page, you did not do that. I guess I need more explanation of what, when to use async and when you don't, or maybe you just didn't need to use async because you already called it in the characters page.
The only reason why I didn't utilize async is so that we have an example of what the request looks like without it being asynchronous. There wasn't a design-based decision as far as efficiency. It was just so we had a visual example of what it looks like without asynchronous.
Okay.
So we can actually use async for both, right?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
So I guess what was the reason you didn't then? You chose not to when you did in a character page.
Just so that we have code that demonstrates a request without it being asynchronous.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I'm just wondering how character ID knows to grab the ID from, the API.
Yeah, so if we want to take a look at what's happening under the hood from the React Router DOM. Under the hood, I'm assuming it utilizes something like useref. And in that use reference, it grabs the window dot URL dot location or somewhere along those lines. I can't remember the exact attribute. And then from there, it utilizes the very last index. So it probably separates or splits the string. I'm just going to pseudocode this. So let the character ID be equal to the use reference value, whatever that gets set to, dot slice, where it would grab the index of the very last slash and the second to last slash. And that's what would return the 6. So if I console.log character ID, that would return 6. All right, so that's off the top of my head, more than likely what's happening under the hood inside of React Router DOM. It's just rather than me writing out all of this JavaScript code to be able to grab that information, I have direct access to it through use params.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Of course. Any other questions?
Who's your favorite Game of Thrones character?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm gonna go ahead and keep it safe and basic with Jon Snow. There you go. All right. Awesome. We've been digging for quite a bit. I'm going to go ahead and let us take a quick breather before we move into our next hook. So as of now, the time on deck is 10:05. Let's go ahead and come back at 10:10 to continue on with our lecture. Thank you, everyone. All right, everyone. So now we have use parameters working correctly, and we're able to reach it through the characters page. But the way that we're reaching it through our characters page is through a link. Which, yes, that works great, but it doesn't necessarily give me a lot of control as to where the page is sending me to, or when I want the page to send me to this information. What if one of these characters, even though it's being displayed inside of the Game of Thrones API, didn't have the information that I needed in order to display. Or maybe that information to this character no longer exists. Now, this is a hypothetical. Obviously, if we take a look at the Game of Thrones API, and we take a look at all of the results for all the characters, we can see that everything that we need is actually there for any character that's listed. Now, in this hypothetical, I want to be able to create a scenario where I want to check if the API response for the independent character is successful. If so, redirect them to the A character page. Now, this isn't necessarily something I can do with the link tag. So instead, I want to actually create the ability to navigate. So I'm going to come to the very top where all my hooks are being generated. And I'm going to create the navigation function with use navigate from React Router DOM. And actually, there's no need for me to keep it here. So I'm going to move it down just so all this code is compressed and every step or comment is with the tools necessary. All right. So now I have this navigation function that will allow me to send my user to different URLs. Well, let me go ahead and add an on-click button here. Instead of having my links, I want there to be a button. And I just realized we have the character.fullname that we could use. So there's no need for me to call those individually. And we could put this entire thing into a button. So now we'll have a list of 30 buttons. Go to characters. There's all the buttons being displayed inside of this LI, this list item. Now I want to on-click
It's an N on button.
Oh, that will do it. There you go. So now on click, I want my function to utilize the navigate function to send me to characters with the parameter of character.id. Let me actually just go ahead and bring that down to a different line. There you go. We'll see how this works. I click on Daenerys. As far as the functionality goes, it looks like everything's still working just like the link did. Right? It is sending me to each character, but rather than utilizing the link, it's calling the function of navigate to do so. So now let's finish out this function that this behavior that we created. I want to say const validate response. This will be an asynchronous function. And what it's going to do, it's going to let status be equal, or excuse me, be equal to await axios dot get, and then we'll go ahead and pass that URL here. We're just going to pass in the character ID as a parameter. All right, so now it sends it to that status, or it sends the request, awaits for the status, and then we can say if status is equal to 200, because we know that's what successful response would look like. Then we want to navigate the user to the following. But instead of this character.id, it would be character ID. Else, we just want to alert data no longer available for this character. So now let's use that function. We're going to say validate response and pass in the character.id. And just for giggles, let's say we're going to add the alert so that we can actually see it. Saying of response status nope, that did not work. There you go. Response status, and then we could pass in the actual status. So let's go over to characters. Oh, that is not what I meant to do. Let's inspect the console. I think I have quite a bit of warnings. Yep, there's the warning for each child character not having a key prop. Fix that here shortly. Click on Brandon Stark. I'm getting, hey, the response status was 200. As soon as I click OK, it redirects me and sends me to Brandon Stark. And it's doing that through the navigate hook. I'm confirming that the data will be there and that the response of this, I'm not necessarily confirming that data will be there, but in this case, I'm confirming that the response will come back successfully. And once I know the response will come back successfully, then I redirect my user. Otherwise, I could just tell my user before they go into a broken page, hey, sorry, but the data for this character is no longer available and you can't visit the data for this character. And that is the use navigate function. Does anyone have any questions regarding the use navigate hook?
Why did you pass the character ID as a parameter instead of just using it as the character ID within the let status equal?
Got it. So I passed in the character ID as a parameter. I could, in here, just grab it from the data rather than the status. But I already have all of the character IDs. Because I am iterating through this character or these characters, I need a parameter to be able to check for each independent character. So I don't have access to this character.id within the scope of this validate response function.
Oh, okay. I understand.
Oh, got it. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah. Can you explain status equal 200? I'm so lost there.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead and turn this into response. And then grab response.status. Oh. All right. Go over to characters here and open up the console. Okay, there's our warning. Click on Daenerys Targaryen. Oh, I did not uncomment that alert. Redo this portion here. All right, click on Daenerys Targaryen. So we get a successful HTTP requests, if you remember from our HTTP lesson, they come back with, oh, come on. They come back with a key of status that will let us know if the request was successful or not. A request that isn't successful because of internal server error will come back with a response 500. That's saying that there's a problem with the server and they weren't able to complete our requests. Then there's a response 400, which is not the server's problem. It is our problem. We're making the request inappropriately. And then the status code for a successful request, for a GET request by default, according to API conventions, it will always be 200 if I am sending a GET request. So in this case, I am asking, is the status 200? Because if so, that means that this API call will be valid, and then I can redirect my user. Does that answer your question, Morty?
Yep. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions?
Off the subject, but I noticed, when you pull up the different images, like everyone's like a different size. Would it be advisable just to essentially create like a CSS, property to assign images pretty much this probably to the smallest size, to maintain resolution?
Yes, I would style it. Whether it's just something inside of Bootstrap. I think they have a component specifically for not a carousel. They have one that's oh, I forgot what it is, but there's one where it essentially takes over. It's meant to display one image with some text under it. I think it's in cards.
Oh, yeah, it's probably in cards. That would make sense.
Let's see. There it is. Yeah, so I would style it using something like this. I'm just creating a component and then rendering that component with the user's information. Or just making the entire page this entire component. So that's, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yes.
Awesome. All right, any other questions? Okay, perfect. Doesn't seem like there are any other questions. I'm going to go ahead and pause our recording here. Going. All right, welcome back, everyone. Before we left for a break, we talked about use params, and we also talked about the use navigate function. Now, I'm going to go ahead and add one more piece of functionality to my page where I'm going to be able to select favorite characters. So now at this point, I'm not only do I have a couple of pages that I've already created, but I want to have something in a global scope, meaning in my entire project that exists in my entire project, named favorite characters. And I'll fix this naming convention here. All right. Now, I said I want this to live globally, meaning in my entire application. So where would this variable of favorite characters live?
In your home page or that ain't it?
Well, my homepage and my about page can't exist at the same time.
In the app.jsx?
Got it. So this would live inside of the app where I would have an array or a use state where we have my favorite characters, which will be set to an array. And we know that this is going to be a use state. So I'll just write it this way for simplicity's sake. All right. Now, why do I want this to live at the app level? Well, I want this to live at the app level because I want to be able to select favorite characters from multiple locations. I want to be able to select favorite characters from within my characters page. I also want to be able to select favorite characters from within a character page. And I want to be able to select favorite characters or deselect favorite characters from my favorite characters page. right? I need 3 separate locations where I need to be able to alter that information. Now, because it's in 3 separate pages, again, these 3 components or these 3 pages cannot exist at the same time. But the application can exist throughout the entirety of the application being rendered on the screen. Well, let's talk about how information is going to be exchanged here. I'm going to take this drawing that we have here. I'm going to expand it so that we can take a look at it in a different manner. So here I'm going to have my app.jsx. Let me turn that back into our black code there. And my app.jsx will render. Now, not only will I have app.jsx, inside of app.jsx, what's the next layer that renders? Let's take a look at app.jsx here. What are the 2 things that are being rendered by app.jsx?
Nav bar and outlet.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and have our nav bar. And let's go ahead and have our outlet. The nav bar gets generated. We have our outlet, which is also being generated there. And then finally, our outlet can render multiple things. Well, inside of my outlet, what are the components that could be rendered?
Home.
All right, so let me go ahead and add that here.
Maybe about page. Okay.
Actually, gonna make this question mark a little bit bigger there. Maybe too big. I'll leave the question mark out there for now. All right, so we've talked about this. Just like you mentioned, we have, change that font. We have our home page. We have our about page. We have our characters page. Currently, we have an A character page. And we also want there to be a favorite characters page. So all of these pages are about to exist. Within my application. Now we know that all of this rendering as to which component will be rendered is on a question mark or a ternary statement that we discussed before, where we check the URL pattern, and depending on that URL pattern, we decide, or the outlet decides, which element is going to be returned. And we do this through the router. Now, in order to pass information from the app to the homepage or to any of these pages, what component would have to take in the information as a prop?
The outlet.
Yeah. So currently, all of our information lives at the app. In order for it to reach any of our pages, we need it to move down to the outlet. And then from there, any of our pages will have access to the information living in app.jsx. All right, so it's just the passing down of information. Well, let's go ahead and start making this functionality here. I'm going to have this use state. So const favorite characters. and set favorite characters and be equal to a use state of an empty array. All right. Now from there, I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit of functions here for being able to add into favorites and being able to remove from favorites. So I'm going to say const add to favorites. This will take in a character. And what it's going to do is it will set favorite characters to the return value from favorite characters.map for every character that where the ID does not match. Oh, let me use this. Does not match. Oh, actually, this is the incorrect function. I'm going through the portion of removing a character. I apologize, everyone. For adding a character, I want to, one, I should probably check if the character already exists. So if favorite characters includes the character, then it's going to alert character already in favorites. Otherwise, I'm going to set favorite characters to favorite characters plus the character. And there's my add to favorites function.
Could you set that initial favorite character use state to a set and avoid the check to see if it already exists?
Could you say
Instead,
that one more time?
instead of using an array for that use state, could you use a set so that you can't put redundant characters in there? It's already filtered out.
I'm not familiar with JavaScript sets, or not to the point where I would be comfortable utilizing them off the top of my head.
Actually, okay. I wasn't sure that JavaScript even had a set.
Yeah, it does.
It
Okay.
does. Yeah, I'm just not familiar enough to be able to use them in this case, but you definitely can. It just seems like a more complex data structure that you would have to work with.
You could actually set it to a set and then set that set to an array, and then you'd still have your array, but it would be auto filtered.
Got it. Yeah, that would be one way of doing it. Absolutely. All right. Awesome. So now that we have this add to favorites, I'm going to go ahead and make a remove from favorites. This is going to follow the same structure here. And all I'm going to do is I am going to set favorite characters to the return value of favorite characters.map, where, and this is the same mistake I made earlier, favorite character, there you go. Where the favorite character that has already been inside of the list, or excuse me, the array, does not match the ID value of the new character that's being passed in. And that will remove from the set information.
Why do you want to use map instead of filter for that?
Oh, that's a good point. I would want to use filter in this case. Thank you. All right. Awesome. So there's my add to favorites that has been created and my remove from favorites that has been created. I have both of those functions available for me, and I have favorite characters and set favorite characters available. Well, just like we said, we need this to be available throughout all of my pages. Now, if we take a look at the drawing, we said that we need to pass this down through the outlet. So let me go ahead and create a use effect here. That will console.log or log to the console the value of favorite characters every time the value of favorite characters changes. And I'm going to pass this down to the outlet as a prompt. Now, when we're utilizing outlet, in order to pass things down as a prompt, there's a specific syntax that we're going to utilize here. We're going to say context, and the context that we're going to pass down will be add to favorites, remove from favorites, and then I also want to pass down favorite characters. All right, so there's our 3 contexts that we're going to be passing down to all of our pages. Now let's go ahead and use it. I'm going to go to my all characters page. And here, I'm going to go ahead and add a button. That will say add to favorites. Now, how do I grab from this button? Well, I need to utilize the context from outlet to be able to grab functions and variables. So here I'm going to say const. I want to grab add to favorites. Let me make sure that's what I named it. Add to faves is what I named it. And I'm going to grab this from use outlet context. You'll see that use outlet context is now being imported from React Router DOM. And now we have that function available to us. So in app.jsx, I created the add to favorites function. I'm passing it down as the context to outlet, just like we saw in our drawing here. And now I'm grabbing it from the outlet within my characters page. And I'm doing so by utilizing the use outlet context hook. Now let's go ahead and add this functionality.
So, sorry, real quick. Where did you import the use outlet context into the characters page?
Could you say your question one more time?
The use outlet context function, did you just import into the characters page?
I did, yes.
Okay.
All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and click or add my add to favorites, which will take in the character as a parameter. Let's take a look at our application now. Going to go over to characters. I'm seeing every single one of my buttons, and I see add to favorites. But when I click on this add to favorites, I now have an array, and that array holds Daenerys Targaryen inside of it. I can continue clicking on them and continue adding each one of those characters. I clicked on one that was already in favorites, and I get character already in favorites. Great. Nothing has changed. Awesome. So all I did was pass down that function. Well, let's grab something else. Maybe I don't want this button to just render automatically. Maybe I wanted to check if it is included, and if it is, then I want it to remove or show the remove button. So in app.jsx, I passed in the favorite characters. This is an array. So I can grab favorite characters from use outlet context. And here I can say, hey, if favorite characters includes the character, this will evaluate to true or false. I wanted to render a button. or remove from favorites. Right, we go ahead and clear our states here. I'm going to refresh the site. That will clear my entire state. I can see I have an empty array from add.jsx. I'm going to add to favorites, and then we can see that the state changed. After that state changed, this all characters or this favorite characters includes evaluates to true, and it shows me that remove from favorites button. I currently have 3 favorites. Now let's go ahead and add that functionality for removing it from favorites. I'm going to, again, pass in the onClick function or event, I apologize, and call the function remove from favorites. Well, I passed it in as remove from favorites just to make sure I don't misspell it. I'm going to grab it as such. I'm going to call remove from favorites and pass in the character. We refresh the site. Currently, all I have is a warning with an empty array. Go to add to favorites, add to favorites, add to favorites. Currently, I have 3. I have Daenerys, Arya, and Brandon. If I remove Daenerys, I get an update to only 2. And if I remove Arya, I get an update to only 1. And then this favorite characters dot includes, because it is a state variable, it triggers the virtual DOM to make the ternary statement and change the buttons between add to favorites and remove from favorites. Does anyone have any questions over what we just did?
So to be clear, outlet content acts more like a reservoir of that just holds essentially what you want to use. It doesn't directly send it to the page. You have to pull it from the actual outlet content.
That's a very good example. Yes, it acts more like a memory location, right? I'm saying, hey, I want you to hold on to all of these information or to all these different variables and functions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to need it in every single one of these pages, right? So for example, in my homepage, I never used it, so it's never rendering in the homepage, nor is it rendering my about page. Currently, it is only rendering in my characters page. Right, and I did that because I used the use outlet context.
I understand. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
So if you had in a larger project, if you had a bunch of pages that needed a bunch of variables that would have been shared from app.jsx, would that use outlet? Would that just be a very long list, or?
It could either be a very long list or you compress them all under one parent data structure or one parent object, and then just pass in that one parental object and destructure it as you're moving into the use outlet context portion.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got one. So the actual like use outlet context, is that something that's built into React?
Not React, that is from React Router DOM. React does have a context element that you can utilize, but it doesn't work exactly the same as React Router DOMs use outlet context. Okay, awesome. Let's go ahead and finish our functionality so we can see a couple more examples here. I'm going to actually take this block of code here with me because I do want to make sure that this part continues to exist. And now I'm going to go ahead and grab this and turn it into existence. Well, at this point, this is a component, but we'll talk about that later on because this is reusable code if I'm copying and pasting it. Just for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste it, but know that we would generally make a component that would pass down props. So now we come over to a character page. And in a character page, I also want these functions to render. I wanted to do it right after the UL item. Well, in order for them to render properly, because currently as of right now, if I click on Daenerys Targaryen, it's giving me an on-call error. And it's saying, hey, these variables that you're trying to utilize don't exist. Favorite characters is not defined. Well, if I take a look at my drawing here, I know they're within the outlet, but now I need to use them within favorite characters. So just like Kenny's example, it's more like a reservoir of information that we can store. And now I need to pull it out. So in order to pull that out, I'm going to do it through use outlet context. So again, I'll say use, or excuse me, I'll pass in const, the structure, the object that comes in from use outlet context. Grab favorite characters, grab remove from favorites, grab add to favorites. And I know all of them are coming in from use outlet context. When I scroll through the top, I'll see that use outlet context has been imported from React Router DOM. And now let's take a look at our project. Well, now in our project, I also have the add to favorites button. So I'm going to add to favorites here, go back to many characters. Interesting. Daenerys Targaryen was added twice. That is a weird glitch. Okay, let me go ahead and go to Daenerys. It was successful. So there is something wrong in my add to favorites portion. So I'm gonna go to app.jsx, add to favorites dot includes character. It does include it. So something in the object must be different.
You have to specify like character.id or something.
That's what I was thinking. I'm gonna go ahead and do that portion there. I'm actually just gonna grab this filter function and utilize that. And I'm gonna say where it equals character ID. So if that evaluates to true, it's going to send that. If it's an empty array, actually, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. There you go. So if it's empty, it's going to evaluate to false. And that should do the trick there. Let me go ahead and refresh this. I do expect that glitch to still exist here of add to favorites, but I expect it to now, there you go, fail. So it's telling me the character is already in there. Good. Now the button, why is it not working correctly? Well, this is just a simple state. I need to pass it in separately. So I can just add another state. I'm going to pass it in as is favorite. Actually, I'm not going to do it that way. What can we do here? Make a separate function. And we could take this very first line here. So if that returns to be truly, then we want to return true. Else, we'll go ahead and return false. I'll just go ahead and pass this is favorite function instead. Go over to characters page and change that. And actually, I think I messed that up here. Yep, it needs to take in a character. Doing a little bit of debugging. I'll go ahead and recap here shortly. I apologize, everyone. All right, that should evaluate to true or false. That fixes there. Now I just need to fix it there as well. All right, so let me do a recap here. I add 2 favorites. Great, that's all working fantastic. I go over to Daenerys. The request was successful, so it shows me Daenerys. And now it's showing me remove from favorites as well. So now I can remove from favorites and everything's working as intended. Now, all I needed to do was I needed to make a constant evaluation. It wasn't able to just map through the array every time the state changed. So instead of leaving it up to useState to handle this information, I created a separate function that is going to be called every time this component renders. This function will evaluate to true or false. If there is a length in the array where the ID matches, it's going to be a value of 1, which evaluates to true. If there is no length within the array, it's going to be a value of 0, which evaluates to false. Now, JavaScript is different than Python. And if I were to pass in an empty array and say, hey, is this true? That it still evaluates to true, even though the data structure is empty. That's the reason why I have to utilize this .length attribute, because 1 and 0, that's truly and falsely. Or an empty array versus an array that has data inside of it, both of those will still evaluate to true. All right. And there's my functionality across separate pages. I'm grabbing all of these functions through use outlet context. Does anyone have any questions regarding use outlet context? Awesome. If no one has any questions, let's go ahead and make our last page here, which is going to be our favorite characters. We make favorite characters JSX, go into coding it. This is going to return multiple elements here. Actually, I'm just going to return. Yep, it will. So 1, it's going to return favorite characters. And then a parental division, which will return cards. But for now, we'll go ahead and render something different in there. What we'll know, or what we know, is we need access to is favorite. We need access to add to favorites. And we need access to remove from favorites. I'm pretty sure I use FAVS as my acronym for all of them. Let me make sure. FAVS. Yep. All right. Awesome. And I want to grab all of these from use outlet context again. All right, so use outlet context brings in all 3 of these properties. I have my favorites, my add to favorites, and my remove from favorites function. Let's throw a little bit of React Bootstrap in here. I'm gonna make a new component. And in this component, I'm going to name it card or character card. I'm gonna go ahead and open that character card. Go over to React Bootstrap, and I'm just gonna grab this card here. can go ahead and name it character card. It's being exported. Go into my favorite characters. And in here, I just want to map, do my favorites. Oops, so I need to pass that in as well. I'm going to go ahead and add that to my outlet context. Of favorite characters. Now I'm going to go ahead and map through it. Where for every character, I want to render a character card. Now this page exists, or I just coded this page, but I haven't connected it to my router. So let me go ahead and do that now. Going to come over to the router. And in here, I'm going to add another path. The path will be to favorites. And the element that I will render will be my favorite characters page. All right, so now we're getting favorite characters not defined. Interesting. Where is this coming from? So favorite character is not defined. This is happening app JSX line 37. App JSX line 37. It isn't defined because this is favorite characters. And there you go. There's our application rendering. Let me go ahead and add the link to our nav bar now. Which will send us to favorites. Currently, I don't have any favorite characters. Great. If I come over to characters and I add a couple of them, now I have 5 of them. I go over to favorites, and I can see 5 cards are being rendered on this division. Great. I can go into my card, and I can pass in a prop name character. The image source that I want to utilize will be from character dot image URL. The card title that I would like to use will be the character dot full name. And in this example here, I'm going to go ahead and make an unordered list with 2 list items. One of them showing the character dot title. Then I believe the last part is character dot house. Which let me make sure that's correct here. Family, it's not house. Now this is going to break. The moment I go into characters and I add a favorite, if I try to go back to favorites, it's going to tell me that I have no properties for image URL. That's because currently I am not passing anything to the character card. Well, I need to go over to favorite characters where I'm mapping through and pass in the correct prop. Again, I currently have no favorites. I can go ahead and add a couple of these. Now, when I go to favorites, I get my character cards displaying for each individual character that I've selected as a favorite. All right, so there's my loop being tied in. I can still pass is favorite as is favorite. I can pass in add to favorites as add to favorites. And I can pass in remove from favorites as remove from favorites. Now that I passed all of these different character attributes in, I can go to, let me go ahead and go to my favorite characters page here, or all characters. Steal this ternary statement one more time. And I'm just going to add it inside of my character card. Which it looks like I've closed. All right. Let's go over to characters, add a couple, go over to favorites. Is favorite is not defined. Well, I haven't destructured these elements, so that makes sense. I need to grab is favorite. I need to grab add to favorites and remove from favorites. Let's try it again. We add a couple of characters. We go to favorites. My card renders, and I have the ability to remove from favorites. It updates my state. And this way I'm removing different characters from my favorite array. All right, we've seen a couple of examples of use outlet context here. We also were able to get a recap over the router provider or how to build our entire project from scratch. We also covered use params, use navigate, and we covered an example of passing down props. All right. At this point, does anyone have any questions regarding use outlet context or anything that's been covered throughout today's lecture?
So it seems that like for the props, just doing the use outlet context is like the easiest way to pass props to things that to where they're needed.
Right. So if use outlet context, we could utilize it within components as well if we really wanted to, but you're running the risk where a component won't be called inside of a page and it could possibly break it. So I would just utilize use outlet context at the page level and then pass it into the components. All right. So if I take a look at my drawing here, my favorite characters page has access through use outlet context. But in here, I have a component. And that component is the card. Now my component doesn't have access to my use outlet context, or it has access to those variables, not because of use outlet context. It has access to those variables because we're passing it down as a prop. All right, so just make sure that whenever you're utilizing use outlet context, utilize it at the page level. That way you don't run into any conflicts with trying to utilize it at the component level. All right. Any other questions?
If you were to build something like this from scratch, kind of like you did today, how often is it reasonable to refer to something like notes? Like you're teaching off of a lesson plan right now, I presume. Could you do this all from memory without assistance?
I could, yes. But the reason why I can is because I've done it so many times.
Hmm.
What are you asking about like my planning process or are you just
No, it's just like this is a whole massive dump of information through the entirety of React. And I know when I'm going through and building the exercises, I'm using the lesson plan, I'm using the notes to remind me on okay, how to do this and how to structure this. Like I guess what's the expectation of our familiarity and proficiency with this gonna be because there's no way I could build a quarter of this without heavy use of open book resources.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, you want to feel stable enough to where you can look at documentation or resources and be able to understand them, right? Because regardless of where you end up working at, you more than likely you're not only going to utilize one tech stack throughout your entire career or one specific front end framework throughout your entire career. You may start working someplace where they are utilizing React, and then at some point they decide, hey, you know what, we're going to switch frameworks from React to Vue or to something else. And they don't want you to have the direct knowledge per se of, oh, well, this is one for one swap off the top of my head, but to have the ability to have a baseline of understanding of how things are working together and be able to research documentation, read the documentation, and because you understand that everything's boxes inside of boxes, you can put the pieces of the puzzle together. That's what they need, right? Someone who's able to research and apply from documentation without having to be handheld. Does that make sense, Tim?
Yeah, it does.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think just the thought is, yeah, like you cranked all this out like on the spot in front of us like in a day, but for us, just kind of learning everything for the first time and trying to put it all together, this would be like a 3-day process that maybe we could do it, but it's a lot to take in, over a short period of time.
Absolutely. Yes. It is definitely a lot. And I was a student that went to Code Platoon as well. I've been in your guys' shoes. I know that I was completely lost by the time we were covering context. And I had to get a lot of help from TAs. It is a matter of rinse and repeat. The more projects you create and the more you run into problems, the better you're going to get at it. The only reason why I'm able to code all of this from scratch is because I've messed it up so many times that I know how to do it properly. It's not the fact that I just got it on the first spot. It's the fact that I've messed it up too many times. Any other questions? Okay, fantastic. That's going to conclude our lecture for the day. Let me go ahead and stop our recording here.